Midnight on the 29th of November 1944. Black water east of Honshu. USS Archerfish, hull number SS-311, rides the waves like a shark with its eyes open. Commander Joseph F. Enright tracks a shadow the size of a city moving under low clouds. It is the carrier Shinano, built on a Yamato-class hull, more than 70,000 tons when full, rushing south at about 17 knots on her maiden voyage. Japanese officers believe size is armor. American sailors believe skill is armor. Enright chooses skill. He does not dive away. He mirrors the carrier's zigzags on the surface, using the SJ radar to keep contact, and the TDC, the torpedo data computer, to solve the problem faster than a human brain can think it through. 6 Mark 14 torpedoes wait in the forward tubes. The crew is quiet. Fingers rest on brass levers. Lungs hold steady. Then the calm voice. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4, Fire 5, Fire 6. 4 hits hammer Shinano's flank. The big ship shudders. Lights flicker. The world's largest target suddenly feels small. Now the sea takes over. Damage control teams fight. Bulkheads close. Pumps throb. But speed falls. Flooding creeps. The escorting destroyers weave and hunt. But Archerfish has already slipped to a safer angle and watches through periscope and radar as the giant lists. Japanese planners built strategy around decisive air battles, not around a single hunter attacking at night on the surface with radar. The doctrine gap yawns open. Dawn tries to save Shinano. It fails. Watertight doors leak. Fire mains lose pressure. Enright tracks, records, and refuses to waste a man or a weapon. This is professionalism, not luck. Hours later, the carrier rolls to starboard and slides under, taking more than 1,000 sailors, tons of aircraft parts, and a national myth with her. The largest warship ever sunk by a submarine dies on her first voyage. 1 American boat. 1 night. 1 result that bends the arc of belief. Why did this happen? Because an open society trains for truth. Our builders standardize the Gato and Balao classes. Our schools drill fire control until numbers feel like muscle memory. Our culture gives a commander a second chance after early mistakes, then expects him to win. Enright had asked for redemption after a difficult first command. America gave it. He paid the trust back in full. A sonarman would later say the sea felt charged in the seconds before the first hit. The screws beating like a steel drum through his headphones, then a deep, soft boom that felt like a mountain moving underwater. The boat shook, then steadied, and the control room breathed again. These are kids from Kansas, Brooklyn, and Fresno. They work a computer the size of a refrigerator in the middle of the ocean, while a crew chief checks gyros and an officer of the deck whispers ranges that match radar pips to the yard. Nothing about this is accidental. It is a machine made of people. Across the water, the enemy feels something break that is not metal. Shinano was supposed to be the answer to the B-29 raids and the long reach of the Pacific Fleet. Instead, a single submarine has shown that Japanese size cannot outrun American precision. Officers who expected to plan airstrikes now plan funerals. A diary later kept by a rescued merchant sailor holds one stunned line. I saw a great ship lean like a building at sunset, and the horizon did not look the same. This is the hook for everything that follows. A small arm of the US Navy, fewer than 2% of the fleet, is about to change the shape of a war by strangling the lifelines that feed an empire. What Archerfish proves in a night will become a campaign. American values, truth in testing, initiative on scene, trust in competent people, and the courage to close become torpedo tracks, shattered propeller shafts, and silent harbours. We do not boast. We log the bearing, the time, the spread, the depth setting, then we get ready for the next patrol. After the patrol, Enright's report is spare and exact. He credits his crew by name and rate. That voice tells you what kind of nation wins wars like this. Calm, honest, deadly when it must be. If you want to see how an open society defeats a closed one, Listen to that cool voice in the logbook while a supercarrier sinks off Japan and the sun lifts over the Pacific. Shinano's loss was not a miracle. It was a message. And America was ready to write more of them. Night of July 22, 23, 1945. North Pacific fog clings to the hills of Karafuto, today's Sakhalin. USS Barb, SS-220, rides just off the coast. Commander Eugene B. Fluckey gathers an 8-man party on the forward deck. He points to the black ribbon of the coastal rail line. A freight train will pass before dawn. If they can cut that artery in enemy home waters and live to laugh about it, the war will hear it. Fluckey's tone is pure America, light, confident, exact. If you get stuck, head for Siberia, 130 miles north. Good luck. The men grin, because the joke hides careful planning. A scuttling charge has been fitted with a pressure switch made from a Japanese explosive and an American spirit of tinkering. They lower a rubber boat. Boots slide into cold surf. The shore team moves inland between stands of spruce, guided by a compass, a watch, and the rhythm of a nation that believes creativity beats fear. Barb was already a legend before this night. She had conducted surface gun attacks, shelled factories, and first in the U.S. Navy launched rockets at shore targets. Fluckey hunted by day when others hid, then attacked by night at flank speed. He taught his crew that bold thinking, not cautious drift, wins in the Pacific where distances are cruel and chances are few. This raid was not a stunt. It was a message. The American mind can turn any problem into a plan. On shore, the team buries the charge under the rails. A wire leads to a crude, brilliant trigger, flattened wood, and a small ampule that will break under a train's weight. Rain beads on sleeves. One man counts seconds in his head to slow his breathing. Another watches for sentries and remembers baseball in Ohio. Back at sea, the submarine turns slow circles, hydrophones listening for the steady beat that means freight and soldiers are rolling toward the trap. In the sail, officers check time by the red glow of a hooded light. They keep the boat primed to sprint if the shore party must run for its life. The first rumble comes thin, then grows into a steel thunder that shakes the ground. Headlights rake the track. The men flatten into the ditch and feel the earth start to move. The locomotive pounds the switch. The pressure gives. The charge flashes white. The night erupts. Boxcars tilt and spill. A shower of cinders rains down. The Americans are already racing for the beach, lungs burning, boots sliding. Out on the water, Barb's engines roar alive. The rubber boat slaps against the hull. Strong arms haul heroes up a steel ladder, 2 at a time. The impossible has happened. An American submarine just blew up a train on Japanese soil and made it out. The enemy's shock is total. Rear areas are not safe. The coastline is no sanctuary. A submarine force that already kills ships at a rate no navy has ever matched now writes its name on land. Somewhere, an officer in a coastal garrison stamps a report and stares at the wall in silence. The truth hiding inside the spectacle is simple. Barb's raid is the tip of a spear made of method. American radar takes the fear out of night. American doctrine gives captains authority to act. Our industry keeps the boats running for long patrols and longer odds. Even the demolition switch on that track was a lesson from 1,000 garages back home. If you do not have the perfect part, you invent the one that works. That is what American kids brought to see. Fluckey's after-action report is crisp and modest. He clocks the detonation, notes the direction of escape, and credits his team as if the whole thing were a routine gunnery exercise. Inside the boat, though, the air buzzes. Men whisper jokes over coffee and then fall silent because they know the bigger picture. Every tanker sunk, every freighter burning, every train smashed means fewer gallons of fuel, fewer crates of parts, fewer hours of pilot training. That is how you strangle an island empire. You cut the veins. A Japanese railway guard captured later in the summer would remember the sound as a hammer on the earth. He wrote a single bitter line in a notebook before the war ended. We guarded bridges, not the ground beneath our feet. That is the shock honest soldiers feel when the enemy sees a flank you never imagined you had. Days after battle, U.S. submarines still searched the sea for survivors from sunken ships, enemy and friendly, because life mattered even in a hard war. Other boats, Pampanito, among them, pulled Allied POWs from the water when hell ships went down, wrapped them in blankets, and handed them chocolate and hope. That contrast turned statistics into faith. Our power had a human face, and that face kept turning toward mercy when possible. The bridge to the next revelation sits right in Barb's engine room. The raid did not happen because of a gadget alone. It happened because a captain trusted sergeants in sailors, clothing to solve problems on the fly. That trust is policy in America. We make leaders at every level. We push decisions to the edge where the facts live, and we let success speak. A train silhouette went up on a battle flag, the first in naval history. The Empire heard the noise and understood the meaning. From here the story widens. Fix the weapons, aim the radar, send more boats, box in the convoys with intelligence and nerve. Barb's spark lights a fuse running across the Pacific chart. It leads to harbors gone quiet, to pilots without fuel, to admirals ordering ships to stay at anchor because the sea itself belongs to American hunters. And if anyone doubts it, they can read the log where a calm hand wrote down what happened here. A U.S. submarine went ashore, broke a railway in the enemy's backyard, and left only a laugh on the wind. The hook hits hard. In 1942 and early 1943, American skippers put perfect shots on target and watched the wakes vanish into silence. Mark 14 torpedoes ran too deep, or struck and failed, or exploded early under the magnetic device that was supposed to make them deadlier. Men risked their lives for duds. Boats came home with photographs of perfect approaches and no kills to show the truth. The question is simple and brutal. How do you strangle an island empire if your bullets refuse to bite? Vice Admiral Charles A. Swede Lockwood, Commander Submarines Pacific, answers with American plain talk and proof. He orders tests off Hawaii, fires live fish at rocky cliffs, strings nets to measure depth, and documents every failure. The data is merciless. The Mark 14 is running far deeper than set, and the magnetic influence exploder, the Mark 6, is too sensitive for the Pacific's latitudes. Lockwood shuts off the magnetic feature and demands a fix to the contact exploder, so it will fire even on a sharp angle hit. He backs his skippers against Washington's doubts, and he does it in writing. The Navy's culture of truth wins over the culture of excuses. The change shows up in patrol reports like a pulse finding its rhythm. Boats that had been snake-bit start sending home tonnage numbers that climb by the week. With corrected depth settings and a reliable firing pin, torpedo tracks end in columns of water and broken ships. Crews who once cursed now grin into the red glow of the control room because their tools finally match their courage. Picture one control room in 1943 after the fix. The captain whispers for silence. The TDC sings in small clicks as the bearings roll across the plot. Range 3,000 yards. Angle on the bow 40. Starboard. Target speed 8. Set depth. Check the gyro angles. Open outer doors. Fire 4. The boat rocks as each fish leaves. 40 seconds drag like hours. Then a deep, round detonation crawls up through the deck plates. It is not luck. It is engineering. This is the American difference at work. We take bad news and make it into better tools. We let frontline reports outrank comfortable memos. We send officers to test until somebody is proven right in daylight. We make humility a weapon because it listens and it learns. The result is a curve that bends from frustration to dominance in a single year. The human cost never vanishes. USS Tang will become the most lethal submarine in history and then be lost in October 1944 when her own torpedo circles back. Some of her men survive as prisoners. One later remembers the night of perfect firing solutions and the sick twist that followed, writing that courage without honesty is waste, but courage with honest tools is victory. That line fits this whole story. The fix did not remove risk. It made risk count. Lockwood's memos carry the tone that defines a free nation at war. Admit the flaw, fix it fast, trust your people and attack. He also pushes radar hard, so night surface attacks turn the Pacific into American time. Training commands absorb the lessons in days, not months. New boats leave shipyards with crews already fluent in the updated doctrine. Industry, science, and seamanship march in step. The island empire does not have a matching rhythm. The enemy feels the shift like a cold wind through a cracked window. Convoy commodores who once expected a dud or a miss now assume that any wake they spot will end in steel torn open. Escorts that trusted magnetic settings to detonate early now find American fish punching deep and straight into the soft belly of a freighter. Captains shout for emergency turns, while lookouts sweep the night and see nothing because radar gave the Americans the first move, and a move was enough. A prisoner from Tang, hauled out of the sea by a Japanese trawler, watches dawn smear grey over the water and thinks of the crews still out there with torpedoes that will work today. He will spend the rest of the war hungry, but he will not doubt that the boats he sailed with are rewriting the math of the Pacific. Later he writes one stubborn line in a small journal: "We fixed what was broken, and then we broke what could not be fixed, the enemy's faith." Numbers tell the scale of the turn. By late 1943, submarine sinkings spike across every sea lane that matters to Japan. Tanker losses cut aviation hours. Freighter losses starve factories. Warships cannot leave harbor without fuel, and even if they do, crews are less trained than last year. This is not only combat, it is supply, training, and movement collapsing because torpedoes finally did what their makers promised on paper. The bridge to what comes next is made of results. Once the weapons work, American radar tactics, code breaking, and standardized boats combine into a harvest of ships that no other nation has ever matched with so few hulls. Less than 2% of the US Navy will end up sinking the majority of Japanese vessels lost. That is not boast, it is arithmetic. The fix in 1940, 3 turned keys for every door the campaign would open in 1944 and 1945. Remember the men in these rooms. A quartermaster keeps a plot as steady as his hand. A torpedoman checks a firing pin with a pocket gauge and says, "This one will not stick." A radioman leans over the set and hears a convoy report that sounds like fate. A captain signs a patrol report that reads like a blueprint for victory. These are Americans, and their greatest weapon is not a tube full of high explosive. It is the national habit of telling the truth and fixing what the truth reveals. The chapter closes where hope begins. The boats go back out. The sea waits. Japan still has ships and courage. America has weapons that match our will. And that combination, honesty, correction, and action will make the next year look impossible on any graph you draw. The torpedo problem is over. The strangling can begin. It starts with a black horizon and a glow the enemy can't see. A Balau-class boat climbs to the surface and runs like a greyhound straight at a convoy, bow cutting cold spray, the captain's face lit by the round green eye of an SJ radar scope. Bearings tick. Range is close. The torpedo data computer hums out a perfect triangle of numbers. On this ocean, eyesight once ruled. Tonight, invisible waves obey American hands, and the night belongs to us. The crew moves as one machine. Lookouts call the faintest smudge. In the conning tower, the captain and the TDC operator ride the solution tighter with every sweep. The tactic is reckless on paper. Stay on the surface at high speed, run into the enemy, fire at near point, blank, then knife away through the gaps. It works because centimeter-band radar, drilled fire control, and steel nerves let American boats see a world the escorts cannot. When the captain orders, "Open outer doors," everyone already knows the next sound. The boat bucks once, twice, again. White pillars lift a freighter and tear it open. Seconds later, a second ship staggers. The convoy scatters, firing at ghosts. The submarine turns flat to the sea and sprints clear at flank. The truth behind the thunder is method. Surface attacks multiply speed, and speed multiplies choice. Radar paints a moving puzzle, and trained men turn pieces into angles, angles into hits. The escorts were built to chase periscopes at dawn. They are blind to a hunter that wears the night like a second hull. American captains form coordinated attack groups and take convoys from both sides, passing contact reports by disciplined radio bursts, closing like wolves that share a map in their heads. Every patrol refines the doctrine. Every successful breakout feeds a classroom back in Pearl where the next crew will learn to win faster. The human cost remains, and it makes victory matter. In September 1944, American boats found survivors from a hell ship and pulled Allied POWs from the after-dark chop. Blankets, coffee, names asked before wounds. A British sergeant, burned with fuel oil and shivering, managed one cracked joke as sailors hauled him aboard. "Didn't expect room service?" A young American torpedoman answered. "You've got the good ship for it." The boat's smell of diesel, coffee, and hot steel became a memory of rescue, not ruin. In a war of machines, mercy was an American weapon too. On enemy bridges, the shock grew by the week. Convoy commodores who had trained to dodge periscope wakes now faced an invisible net. Escorts fired into darkness and chased phantom radar returns. Some ships steamed with searchlights cutting white cones across empty water, as if light itself could push back the math. It couldn't. The new night fights were not lucky ambushes. They were repeatable. That word repeatable breaks morale faster than stories of one enemy ace. You can measure the change in the way skippers wrote. Early patrol reports carried careful phrases and frustration over duds and missed chances. Reports after the radar revolution read like engineering poetry. Bearing drift, constant angle on the bow, increasing echo strength, 2 targets overlapping, spread corrected by 0.2 degrees, 3 hits observed, secondary explosions. It is the tone of a nation that makes its courage count by getting the tools right and the training exact. What makes this American is not only the gear, but the trust. Captains were given latitude to invent on scene. Some ran down the throat at charging escorts. Others used radar to parallel a convoy all night and wait for the exact cross. No one said, "Wait for orders." The order was to think, act, and send results. That is how a free country fights when it must. Responsible people moving at the speed of responsibility. If you want a single image to carry out of this chapter, take the circle of faces around a glowing scope at 0200, hearing only wind, engine throb, and the quiet words that make steel obey. Young men from towns with names the enemy could not pronounce used a homemade accent to command invisible energy. They created a horizon under the horizon, and they turned darkness into an ally. This is the bridge to the next leap. If the night belongs to the United States, then fuel, fire, and factories will soon belong to us too by not belonging to the enemy. The same calm voices that made radar a blade are about to squeeze the lifeline of an empire until ships sit at anchor like statues and pilots train on fumes. The next beats are cruel, clinical, and decisive. The ocean will become a ledger, and America will write the numbers. A single tanker goes down and a week of flight training dies with it. That truth, learned early and paid for in sweat, became policy. American skippers began aiming at the veins, not just the fists. Oil first, then the freighters that fed factories. Japan's map looked bold, but it was paper pinned to fuel. U.S. submarines folded that map by tearing out the pins. A captain studying routes knew the rhythm. Oil up from the southern fields, steel and rice across the inner seas. Troops carried on rust, streaked hulls that tried to hide in weather. He picked corners where currents, land, and schedules squeezed the target lanes, then parked his boat like a trap set by tide. When a tanker's bow cut the horizon, the approach felt personal. Radar gave range. The TDC laid down angles. The crew set depths to punch below armor and into the soft places where liquid weight would do the rest. A hit on a loaded tanker feels different in the bones of a submarine. It is slower, deeper, like the ocean swallowing air. By 1944, the results were savage and simple. Tanker sinkings climbed. Aviation hours fell. Destroyers and cruisers sat at piers because fuel stockpiles were guarded like crown jewels and too thin to train with. Factories still had machines. Workers still had discipline. But the pumps were dry. The war of inputs ended battles before they began. American boats kept scoring because the targets had to move. Japan could ration courage. It could not ration distance. You see the strategy in the nicknames skippers gave their boats and crews. They hunted with humor and stubborn faith. The culture that made hot rods and farm tools back home made torpedoes matter at sea. When a convoy tried to pass under cover of weather, an American captain used radar and nerve to ride the edge of a squall and stayed just close enough to kill without getting caged. When escorts learned to weave, we aimed at the ships that carried the weaving fuel. It is ugly math. It is how wars are won. A human thread runs through this hard arithmetic. In one rescue, an American boat found Allied POWs from a torpedoed transport, men coated in oil and salt, eyes burned and voices ragged. Sailors pulled them aboard with boat hooks and broad backs. An Australian corporal, 19 and shaking, whispered, "I didn't think anyone remembered us." The coxswain passed him a tin cup. "We count everybody," he said. Kindness on a steel deck turned into a legend those men carried home. In a world of hunger policies and slave labor, that cup of coffee was a flag. The enemy's shock grew colder, not louder. Staff officers wrote memos about rerouting, faster convoys, more escorts, and shallow coastal steaming. The numbers still got worse. Shipbuilding could not keep up with losses. Routes that hugged shorelines ran past new ambush points. Captains cursed invisible attackers and felt their responsibility to deliver cargo curdle into dread. Resistance didn't die, it dulled. That is what strangling a lifeline really looks like. Inside American boats, the mood stayed professional. The plotting table did not gloat. A quartermaster's pencil slid steady through long nights. Torpedomen checked firing pins twice, then once more for luck. The engine room kept miracles going in salt and heat so the captain could choose where to fight, not accept what the enemy offered. When a convoy exploded into white water and smoke, the crew wrote it down, changed course, and looked for the next artery. It is easy to talk about boldness. It is harder to honor discipline. This campaign needed both. The world sometimes forgets that submarines also saved. After sinking an escort, a boat might circle back through wreckage to pull enemy sailors out, bandage them, and write their names in the log with the same care as a torpedo expenditure. A Japanese second officer, hauled over the side shivering and afraid, stared at the blanket put on his shoulders and said, "I thought you would let me drown." The pharmacist's mate answered, "Not today." That is America in a sentence. By the end of 1944, the shape of the war had changed. Pilots climbed into cockpits less often. Gunnery teams drilled less. Big ships rationed miles. The Empire still possessed harbors, docks, and plans. But the sea lanes between those points had turned into minefields, drawn with pencils in Pearl Harbor's tracking rooms and cut open by boys who could read a radar scope like a book. The open ocean had become hostile to an island empire. That is not fate. That is policy paying off. The bridge to the next chapter is the brain behind the blade. Tankers did not blunder into torpedoes by accident. Someone in a small, hot room far from the fight read enemy signals, marked likely tracks, and pushed pinholes on a chart that meant life or death for thousands of miles around. We owned the night. We closed the valves. Now meet the map that fought for us, and the minds that made an ocean feel small. How do a few dozen submarines find needles in a black ocean the size of the moon? That was the problem on the table in Pearl Harbor's tracking rooms, where young Americans bent over maps under green lamps and made chaos give up patterns. They listened to the enemy talk without hearing words, measured radio habits, read tides and timetables, and stitched together a picture that captains could use. The submarines were the blade. This was the hand that guided it. The revelation was quiet and relentless. Codebreakers and traffic analysts sifted call signs and schedules until convoys lost their mystery. If a ship left Singapore on a certain tide, it reached a choke point on a certain day. If an escort commander used a favorite turn pattern, a submarine could be waiting just outside the arc. Weather that once hid targets became another variable in an American equation. The result was eerie to the men at sea. You show up on a line of latitude at midnight, and the ocean delivers a convoy like a train arriving at a platform. That is not luck. That is national brainpower burning late. Inside the tracking rooms, the work felt like music written in pencil. A plotter stabbed a pin and tied string. A lieutenant drew boxes on a chart and whispered, "Give them 2 hours for uncertainty." A chief yeoman copied updates and sent them west with bare radio bursts that told skippers just enough. The tone matched the submarines they served, calm, exact, disciplined. When a captain read a contact estimate from Pearl, he knew it came from minds that respected risk and had skin in the game, even if those minds never left the island. At sea, results came like clockwork. Wolf packs formed as coordinated attack groups and took convoys apart piece by piece, each boat knowing where its partner would be because someone ashore had done the geometry. A captain parallel tracked a fat target all night on radar, passed contact to a teammate, and then slid in to finish the wounded straggler. The enemy tried zigzags, radio silence, and coastal hugging. The maps in Pearl shifted, and the trap lines shifted with them. Fighting a learning enemy is a race. Intelligence made us faster. The human element is a face at the edge of drowning that turns into a grin under a blanket. In one rescue, an Australian POW who had been chained below on a transport felt a hook snag his life jacket and a hand pull him toward a ladder. His first full sentence on deck was rough and simple. "Mate, I thought the sea had me." The sailor who saved him said, "Not tonight." Later, in a wardroom turned sick bay, the POW scribbled in a notebook with a trembling hand, "These men hunt with numbers and save with names." His body shook less after hot soup. Courage returned with calories and kindness. Across the lines, the shock was moral and mental. Japanese officers, honorable and skilled, discovered that convoys that should have been safe were being met like appointments. They could not see the ears that heard them, or the eyes that mapped them. They were not beaten by a single foe's genius, but by a national system that turned every report into a better plan. A doctrine built for decisive surface battles had no language for losing to a ledger in an office and a torpedo track drawn hours in advance. Some called it sorcery. It was statistics and sweat. The best proof of superiority is repeatability. Night after night, month after month, American boats arrived on time to lanes chosen thousands of miles away. The targets changed, the results did not. That is how you know a nation has found the lever that moves a war. The submarines could be bold because the people ashore were precise. The people ashore could be precise because the submarines sent back honest results. This loop, the American loop, made the Pacific feel smaller to us and impossibly large to the enemy. There is craft in the language of those rooms. Intercept box, barrier patrol, traffic density, dry words, hard impact. A young analyst marked a likely diversion route and wrote, "Recommend cover," and a captain who never learned that analyst's name slid his. Periscope above a black sea at the exact minute it mattered. You can call that luck. You will be wrong. It is a republic at work. Teachers, engineers, code clerks, sailors, all pushing the same wheel, all trusting that the other hands are honest. The chapter must end with the picture whole. Imagine an ocean with threads running through it. Each thread a convoy the enemy must run. Each thread tugged by an American hand that knows time, tide, and fear. Our submarines took those threads in their teeth. Our analysts told them where to bite. The enemy swung clubs at shadows while we used a surgeon's knife in darkness. We asked a hard question at the start. How do you find the needles? The answer is this. You build the magnet. You put brains behind bravery. And you make every mile the enemy must sail feel like a mile too far. The river freezes in Wisconsin, and a submarine slides past barns and silos on a floating dry dock, headed for war. Manitowoc Shipbuilding has stamped out another Belau-class boat, 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, diesel-electric heart, thicker steel for a test depth around 400 feet, radar on the mast, and a Mark 3/4 torpedo data computer built by the Ford Instrument Company beating like a clock. In Groton, electric boat welders pull double shifts. At Portsmouth and Mare Island, Navy yards turn blueprints into hull numbers with a rhythm that feels like music. The miracle isn't one boat. It's the sameness. Parts fit. Gauges match. A torpedoman from Seahorse can walk into Barb's forward room and feel at home because America decided that interchangeability was a weapon. A new crew steps aboard and moves like they've been here before. The engine room smells of hot oil and Fairbanks Morse pistons, the mess cooks sling coffee, and sailors check SJ surface search radar, and SD air search sets the way farm kids check weather. They know 6 fish forward give a captain a fence, 4 aft give him insurance, and 2 5-inch guns topside turn a submarine into a fast, mean surface raider when the sea is safe. The training pipeline at New London has forged habits. Stand by to dive, rig for silent running, trim down, make your solution, shoot straight, live to do it again. On a pier in Pearl Harbor, the tender USS Fulton feeds spares, torpedoes, and mail. Forward bases at Fremantle, Midway, and Saipan keep the line short so the boats never cool. Standardization turns courage into output. A cracked circulating pump does not ground a patrol. A tender swaps it in hours. A radar set fails, and a replacement slides into the same mounts, wires to the same pins. Torpedoes get the same depth settings because the curves match across the class. When Lockwood pushes a change, kill the magnetic exploder, fix the firing pin, modify doctrine for high-speed night attacks, every hull of the same type swallows the update without fuss. That is industrial war done right. The front speaks, the rear answers, and the next patrol leaves better than the last. A Japanese radio operator pulled from a raft after his freighter breaks in 2 stairs at the clean deck, where Americans wrap him in a blanket and take his name. He whispers the truth in a stunned voice. Your ships are the same. He means it as a question and a confession. He has sailed on war-built freighters with mismatched fittings, escorts that lack parts, and crews rotating through machines that feel different every time. He realizes the fight is not only at sea, it's lost in the yards. Men who spent peacetime building cars and locomotives now build submarines by the dozen, and each is a copy of a killer. The boats come with personality because the men give them one, but the bones are alike. Belau hulls carry the same 5-compartment layout. Every control room can become every other control room with a week of drills. That frees minds. Skippers invent tactics instead of ways to work around quirks. Fire control, partie perfect, muscle memory. A plot drawn on one table looks like a plot on another. Even comfort matters. Ice cream from a tender's galley, movies on a bedsheet between patrols, typed letters that catch up with a boat in Saipan. These little luxuries keep sharp edges sharp. Abundance is psychological warfare too. Listen to the names rolling off a tender's loudspeaker. Tang, Barb, Wahoo, Harder, Trigger, Archerfish, Tirante, Seahorse. Each carries a crew, a skipper, and a notebook of tricks that passes fast to the next hull because the next hull is the same. Richard O'Kane, who learned hunting beside Mush Morton on Wahoo, takes Tang out and fights at a tempo the enemy cannot match. Eugene Flucky gets Barb to do things a manual writer would never dare write. Slade Cutter turns Seahorse into a battery of torpedoes that fire truth. None of this happens without the quiet miracle of standard boats and thick logistics. The enemy always fights back. Escorts get better, air patrols get tighter, convoys learn to hug the coast. It doesn't matter enough. America's yards keep pace, and then pass the pace. A submarine tender at Majuro changes out a generator in a day and sends a boat back to the line. At Midway, a depot swaps radar, tests tubes, calibrates TDCs, and pushes crews through updated classes where last week's patrol reports become this week's doctrine. It is not glamorous, but it is the reason glamour has teeth. A British POW ferried to safety after an American rescue watches sailors grease a gun mount and checks the machine-stamped numbers on a crate of spares. "Looks like my father's factory," he says, half smiling through split lips. The coxswain laughs. "We brought our factories with us." That line explains the next graph you will see. Ships sunk rising like a cliff while US losses hold low and steady in proportion because the boats keep moving, the parts keep coming, and the crews never have to relearn the ship they sail. In a Fremantle bar, machinist's mate taps his glass on a table, notched with boat names, and says, "Every one of us could fix the other guy's problem." He means it. This is a national habit. We standardize so talent scales. We trust so speed grows. We build so distance shrinks. An island empire lives and dies on motion between islands. A continental power with railroads, rivers, and factories can send hull after hull until the map tilts. Now picture a convoy running north with oil, black wakes cutting dawn water. 3 Balau boats, built on 2 coasts and a river, take stations from a plan written in pearl and a doctrine written by experience. Radar pings. The TDCs purr. Torpedoes hit like hammers where the tanks are fat and the seams are brittle. Fires paint the sky. A destroyer turns to chase and finds nothing but the cold line where a submarine just was. That is standardization at war. A pattern across steel, skill, and time that makes every night feel like the last night for the enemy. From frozen river to open Pacific, assembly line predators have turned America's ideas into teeth. The next step is leadership that refuses comfortable fictions and rewards dangerous truth. The boats are ready. The parts fit. The crews can sprint. Now put decision-makers on the bridge who will bet their careers that honesty beats pride. America did. And the ocean learned our names. He reads a patrol report that hurts and circles the sentence with a pencil. Vice Admiral Charles A. Swede Lockwood doesn't bury bad news. He builds on it. Torpedoes are failing. Approaches are perfect and ships sail away. The old way would be to protect reputations and hope for luck. Lockwood fires live fish at Hawaiian cliffs, drags nets to read depth, orders the magnetic exploder disabled, and tells Washington he'll take the heat. The heat comes. He holds the line. Results, not alibis. A culture shifts because a man in charge says yes to frontline facts. He promotes the skippers who bring back tonnage, and he relieves the ones who can't find a fight. Not cruel, just clear. He pushes radar tactics that seem wild to desk officers, authorizes coordinated attack groups, and tells captains that initiative is policy. In Fremantle, controversy swirls around torpedo doctrines. In Pearl, Lockwood makes the call and backs it with tests. The lesson goes out over radio schedules and in sweaty wardrooms. Think fast, act clean, write it down, and send it home so the next crew starts where you finished. Richard H. O'Kane learns under Dudley Mush Morton on Wahoo that aggression paired with discipline is a formula, not a mood. As skipper of Tang, O'Kane runs down the throat shots, teaches men to trust the TDC and their nerves, and writes patrol reports that read like lab notes spiked with adrenaline. Eugene B. Flucky on Barb turns the coastline into a target range and flips the definition of submarine warfare on its head by attacking what doctrine said to fear. George L. Street 3 will take Tirante into harbors like a burglar with a badge. Over and over, leadership translates permission into pressure where the enemy least expects it. An American electrician's mate from USS Grenadier, captured after the boat is forced to the surface in April 1943, scratches a line in his mind he'll later write down. They told us to be bold, and then gave us tools that matched our orders. In captivity, he refuses to give the enemy the comfort of despair. He remembers Lockwood's calm eyes at a pier ceremony, remembers a skipper's light voice under pressure saying, "We will shoot again." The human element matters because men fight for leaders who make sense, who tell the truth, who put their names under orders they believe. The enemy is not foolish. Japanese destroyer captains are brave, skilled, and relentless. They learn to drop patterns, to listen, to charge, but they fight a system that cannot admit the scale of its mistakes fast enough to fix them. Fuel dictates training hours, and training hours dictate survival under fire. American leadership closes the loop. A failure becomes a test becomes a fix becomes doctrine becomes a kill. The other side hides failure until it's a famine. Morale follows justice. When a timid skipper is quietly sent ashore and a hunter gets the next patrol, sailors feel the ship get lighter. You can hear it in the engine room. You can feel it on the bridge. A torpedoman who trusts his captain loads faster. A quartermaster plots cleaner. The talk at the coffee urn sharpens into that American tone of gentle mockery that hides respect. This is a navy inside a nation that believes promotion should follow performance. It shows. Leadership isn't only steel, it's mercy. Skippers who risked their boats to rescue Allied POWs from hellship sinkings did not ask permission to be human. They acted and wrote it up later. A British sergeant, hauled aboard from oil-black water, hears an American captain say, "We have you," and the tone is the same tone he used with his crew. Authority sounds like comfort in the right mouth. It binds men who might need to run into gunfire at dusk and into a rescue at dawn. Lockwood's rumoured quips about the thin line between a commendation and a court-martial carry more than humour. They tell sailors that risk is not a sin if it's thought through and aimed true. They also warn that sloppiness is not courage. That balance turns the Pacific Campaign from a string of daring tales into a record of repeatable excellence. Historians would later tally sinkings and tonnage. But what the numbers truly measure is a culture that married brains to bravery and stamped cowardice as costly. A Japanese staff officer, captured at war's end, says it simply in a debrief. "Your commanders learned faster." He doesn't mean one genius. He means a bench. From patrol division commanders to tender captains, from codebreakers to chiefs of the boat. American leadership kept moving the puck toward daylight. Every layer listened to the one below and demanded proof from the one above. The system trusted people and punished inertia. That is rare in any age. It wins wars in every age. The boats themselves reflect this spirit. A gato or balau is a set of choices frozen in steel. 10 tubes to give a captain options, big batteries to sprint submerged, SJ radar to own darkness. Those choices mattered because men with names and dates made them count. When Lockwood sent a boat out after a quick turn and a hard fix, he put reputation behind it. When O'Kane or Flucky pressed an attack that an older book would avoid, they put their crew ahead of their comfort. Men follow that. In the end, leadership did what leadership must. Take a small piece of a big navy less than 2% and point it like a lance. The numbers that follow will sound made up if you don't know this chapter. They aren't. They are the ledger entries of decisions honored under pressure. The enemy felt the result as emptier tanks and quieter harbors. Our crews felt it as a chance to come home because the people in charge got the important things right. The next chapter is the scoreboard history can't ignore. It takes your breath. Fewer than 2% of the US Navy strangled an empire's lifelines and smashed its war plans. By the end, American submarines sank around 1,314 enemy ships, including most of Japan's merchant tonnage and a punishing share of its warships, roughly 5.3 million tons of freighters and tankers, and more than half of all Japanese vessels lost by wartime accounting. The Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee would put the percentage near 54.6%, a number that feels like a misprint until you stack patrol reports and see the pattern. The force paid dearly, 52 submarines lost, about 3,506 submariners dead, and still kept pressing. Small arm, giant reach, unforgettable math. Picture the Pacific with strings across it. Oil up from the south. Rice, steel, men, and machines shifting along home waters. Every string becomes a target because a nation with standardized boats, honest tests, sharp leadership, radar at night, and codebreakers in the back room moves like one mind with many hands. Once torpedoes worked and doctrine hardened, the curve bent like a whip. 1,944 looks like an avalanche on any chart worth reading. Names put skin on the numbers. USS Pampanito prowls the South China Sea in September 1944 and turns from hunter to angel when hell ships go down, hauling Allied POWs aboard men coated in oil, burned, skeletal, still alive. 73 saved by Pampanito's hands, with more rescued by sister boats in the same hunt, blankets and chocolate, proving that an iron fleet could carry a soft heart without losing its edge. On another patrol, USS Archerfish watches a huge shadow roll and vanish the carrier Shinano, sunk on her first voyage, a symbol turned statistic. On another, USS Tang tears convoys apart with O'Kane's speed and nerve until fate throws a cruel ricochet. Each tale is one wave in a storm. An Australian POW saved from the water writes later that the first American word he heard was "welcome," and it sounded like a flag. A Japanese second officer, pulled from a lifeboat after his tanker went under, sits wrapped in a US Navy blanket and mutters, "Your submarines were everywhere," meaning it not as praise but as surrender to inevitability. A Dutch sailor stares at the neat handwriting in a US log, his name, his age, his hometown, and laughs through cracked lips because order, even on a steel deck, feels like kindness when you've known chaos. Statistics gather faces. Look at the mechanics of dominance. Night surface attacks with SJ radar turned escorts into blindfolded boxers. The TDC converted motion into solutions while captains closed with 6 forward tubes ready to speak at once. Belau-class stale-let boats ride deep and push batteries hard. Codebreakers in Hawaii and Australia drew boxes on the sea where convoys would pass tomorrow night. Tenders like Sperry, Holland and Fulton pushed parts, torpedoes and mail forward, so patrol tempo never sagged. Every link worked, so the chain pulled. The enemy's shock shows in the quiet phrases of post-war reports. Fuel shortages, grounded air groups and anchored ships that looked powerful on paper. Training hours fell, and with them fell the edge that keeps pilots and destroyer crews alive under stress. Convoys attempted new routes and new tricks and met the same outcome because the American Loop report, fix, teach, repeat, moves faster than any single man can. Good sailors in the Imperial Navy did their duty and watched arithmetic beat audacity. If you want the numbers to breathe, walk a memorial where the names of 52 submarines are carved stone deep. Argonaut, Grunion, Wahoo, Harder, Tang. The casualty rate for submariners ran near a fifth of the force. Men kept volunteering anyway. They volunteered because the mission made sense, and their leaders told the truth. They volunteered because each patrol felt like adding a brick to a wall that would hold. They volunteered because they were Americans and believed hard jobs should be done by the willing. In Pearl Harbor, a clerk totals tonnage and dates, and the columns look like a factory report for a deadly product line. But even in the numbers there is grace. POW rescues, life jackets tossed to enemies, bandages wrapped on hands that had fired torpedoes hours before. Democracy fights with a strange mix of steel and mercy. That mix demoralizes tyrants, because it shows power isn't cruelty, it's capacity. Abundance saves as well as strikes. Now step back and see the whole canvas. Less than 2% of the fleet, more than half of the enemy's losses. One service arm cripples a continent, spanning plan from thousands of miles away by turning movement into risk and risk into ruin. You don't need to shout about that. You need to say it plainly and let the viewer's jaw drop. The men on those boats were citizens with jobs waiting, kids who liked baseball and engines, chiefs who could fix anything, captains who read numbers like poetry, and commanders who made policy out of proof. The chapter ends where the war's heart stops. Harbors fall silent because there is no fuel to feed propellers. Factories starve because freighters are steel bones on the bottom. Admirals plan sorties they cannot afford and train pilots on empty air. The ocean is huge until a nation makes it small. America did, with skill and stubborn kindness. The last wake fades, the ledger closes, and a tiny force leaves behind a giant truth. Free people who tell the truth build the same, and learn fast can turn the biggest ocean on earth into a road their enemies dare not drive. The destroyer's bow wave rose like a white wall, guns spitting fire across black water, and Richard H. O'Kane did the thing textbooks called crazy. USS Tang held course straight at the onrushing escort, angle tightening to a knife's edge, the torpedo data computer built by the Ford Instrument Company, clacking steadily while bearings slid whole degrees in seconds. "Stand by," he said, voice even. 6 Mark 18. Electric torpedoes waited, wakeless and hungry. Down the throat, shots aren't just courage, they're geometry. The bow offers the smallest target and the surest kill, because a ship can't dodge its own momentum in time. Tang fired. Seconds stretched. A hollow punch rolled through steel. The escort folded in white water and iron, and O'Kane said only, "Reload," because a hunter never wastes a window. Discipline welded to daring made these attacks work. The TDC turned motion into math, so impossible shots became repeatable drills. Plotters whispered range and angle. Torpedomen set gyro angles by touch on brass dials. Radar men fed speed, bearing, and course changes in clipped syllables that sounded like music to trained ears. Mark 18 seconds carried smaller warheads than the hot-running Mark 14 seconds, but their silence turned seconds into surprise. At point-blank range, the only armor that matters is time, and American crews stole it with practice. Open outer doors. Fire. Count. Correct. Fire again. A convoy felt not just explosions, but the shock of death arriving before a warning could leave a mouth. Close quarters grit ran across the force. Commander Sam Dealey, on USS Harder, destroyer killer, baited escorts in 1944, diving through counterattacks that shook frames like a bell, then surfacing to jab again. Commander George L. Gell, Street 3 took USS Tirante into shoal water and harbor mouths, torpedoing ships in daylight ranges where land's smell mixed with diesel and battery acid. Commander Slade Cutter turned Seahorse into a metronome, salvos landing like appointments. Leadership gave permission for boldness because crews could execute boldness safely. That is how heroics become policy, and a miracle becomes a method. The enemy guessed at luck. Our logbooks showed procedure. Instruments made courage, cash out. The TDC's steel cams solved triangles faster than the human brain. SJ Radar's green eye painted smudges of steel long before eyesight could. Balau-class batteries bought submerged sprint when seconds were life. Men read hums and pings the way farmers read weather. A thick, rounded ping meant a belly offered. A thin, ragged echo meant distance and risk. Lookouts learned the shape of danger in starlight. A helmsman could feel the sea's shoulder under the keel. Hands knew the boat's heartbeat and trusted it under fire. There was always a cost. On the night of 25 October 1000, 944 inches the Formosa Strait, fate curved cruel. Tang, on a record patrol, fired a final torpedo that made a circular run. A thin, wrong sound slid under the hull, the sound submariners dread. The fish came back and struck. Compartments blew. Lights died. The boat rolled and settled. Survivors, including O'Kane, were dragged from the sea, beaten into cells and handed a slow calendar of captivity. Even there the creed held. Courage without precision is waste. Courage with precision is victory. Sometimes victory costs. The sentence fits the campaign. Point. Blank Knights also wrote mercy into steel. When Hell ships went down in September 1944, Pampanito and sister boats risked counterattack to haul oil-blackened men aboard. A Royal Navy signalman tried to salute on a slick deck. "Save your strength," a coxswain said, wrapping a blanket around him. A pharmacist's mate eased raw eyes with boric solution, passed a tin cup, wrote a name and age neatly into the log. The same nerve that took boats to ramming distance took sailors back through wreckage to rescue strangers. Not a footnote, a flag. Across convoy lanes, the enemy felt the moral center tilt. Escorts built to protect became trophies. Searchlights clawed empty spray. Zigzags collapsed into collisions as panic overruled plan. Officers trained for elegant daylight duels watched small American crews turn minutes into kills with machine-calm rhythm. Japan had brave men. The shock was that American bravery arrived packaged with interchangeability, doctrine, radar, and torpedoes whose fuses finally told the truth. That combination is rare. It is how a free country makes fear serve strategy. Harder's last fight shows both edges. In August 1944, Dealey sank 5 destroyers, punching into escorts at pistol ranges before Harder was lost to depth charges after another audacious approach. The legend was earned clean: aggressive attack, crisp fire control, willingness to press when others would settle. Streets Tirante earned the Medal of Honor by sliding into Kwangnam Bay in March 1945, torpedoing in shoal water and blasting out under fire. Courage wasn't noise, it was clarity. The boats did not worship danger. They measured it, bet smart, and paid in. Steel only when the payoff was victory. The machinery carried stories. Torpedo rooms smelled of graphite and alcohol. Torpedomen stroked Mark 18 fins like calming horses. A misset gyro angle wasn't a number. It was a life bent wrong. Checks were done by touch in darkness. Chiefs trained hands until muscle memory made math. Fire 3 snapped a dozen silent promises tight and sent them forward in a single silver body. Above, the bridge rode wind and spray. The captain's face glowed in radar light. The exec's pencil ticked a paper plot even as the TDC spun its metal brain. Sonar sang a thin chant. Bearing mark, range increasing, target zig. Beneath everything, engines throbbed with the old smell of oil and hope. On a good night, the sea felt like a machine that would obey if you spoke its language. For an escort captain, terror was arithmetic he could not see. A submarine at flank in a dark squall could match convoy speed, slide inside the screen, fire at 2,000 yards and less, and whip away using the same weather that hid the approach. Even when hedgehogs and depth charges rained down, an American boat used fine depth control and battery power to underrun the patterns, then popped up miles off to strike again. Not magic. Craft multiplied by tools. In Tang's control room, a perfect shot brought a second of silence, then motion. Reset, reposition, re-engage. The helmsman eased a degree to port without orders. The exec murmured, "Tubes ready." The periscope's lens cap clicked, a sound every man could identify blindfolded. Danger wasn't a thrill. It was a variable managed with training. The TDC hummed, the radar swept, the ship's bell ticked the hour like a heartbeat. The night belonged to those who could turn seconds into decisions. American boats made seconds obey them. Multiply that skill across hundreds of patrols, and the enemy's calendar tears itself apart. Point-blank attacks weren't madness. They were the cleanest path. Through chaos, the shortest road to safety for a free people who believed that courage, harnessed to instruments and discipline, could bend fate. We took time. We spent it. And in the South China Sea, the Formosa Strait, and off Honshu's dark coast, we taught steel to listen. The carriers looked grand at anchor, paint smooth, flags crisp, decks swept clean, dead ships posing as living ones. By late 1944 and into 1945, the Imperial Navy still had steel, guns, and pilots on paper. What it lacked was oil in the tanks. Submarines had made a choice and turned choice into a hammer. Tankers first. Every loaded hull sunk erased flight hours somewhere, clipped a squadron's readiness, and stole options from an admiral's hand. That is how a small arm paralyzed a large fleet. We targeted motion, not medals. Cut the arteries, and the body goes numb. The mechanics were pitiless and precise. Convoys leaving the southern fields dragged predictable shadows. Palembang to Singapore, Miri to Formosa, Saigon up the coast. American boats waited where tide and time squeezed the lanes tight. Radar let a submarine ride the weather's edge, tracking without sight until the instant to aim under armor and into a tanker's soft heart. When a loaded ship died, fire climbed like a pillar, and the sea itself seemed to burn. Numbers written in pearl sailing dates, expected speeds, choke points blossomed as kills across a chart. Curves bent so hard that home waters once safest became gauntlets. Training fuel vanished, flight hours fell, task groups existed but rarely sailed. An empire of islands must move or starve. Submarines made moving the greater risk. Shortage echoed in diaries. A petty officer wrote that aircraft were towed to the line, then back to the hangar when allocations changed midday. A destroyer division drilled at pier because cruising steam was rationed like medicine. Pilots who once flew daily now flew weekly. When war finally dragged them skyward, they met Americans whose hands were steadier from constant practice. The shock wasn't only defeat. It was the slow humiliation of waiting for fuel that never came while the radio barked about honor. Honor cannot start an engine. Oil can. America took the oil away. Small moments made the big picture real. One night, a U.S. captain watched a coastal convoy shave rocks to save miles. He paralleled it for hours, adjusting speed by half knots, drawing shepherd dog arcs with the TDC, while lookouts sniffed land on the wind. At dawn, he fired from inside the enemy's idea of safety. 2 tankers died against their own shoreline. In the control room, men grinned because plan had become habit. On deck afterward, a machinist's mate sipped coffee and said what everyone felt. They can't do this much longer. He was right. Mercy kept its place in the ledger. An Australian POW hauled aboard after a hell ship went down couldn't stop shaking. The pharmacist's mate spooned condensed milk and water until the tremors eased, then tucked dry socks over raw feet. Thought the sea had me, the rescued man whispered. Not when we're around, the corpsman answered. Sailors gave shirts and chocolate, then returned to stations to hunt again. That mix hard hands, warm hearts broke enemy stories about Americans as much as torpedoes did. It proved strength without cruelty is possible, and made surrender feel safer than stubbornness. In headquarters, analysts watched proof accumulate. Tanker losses translated into aviation hours like a grim equation. Fewer ships, fewer flights, fewer trained men, fewer sorties that mattered. By spring 1945, some of Japan's proudest hulls were prisoners of their peers. The sea did not shrink. American reach grew. Our boats owned dark, distance, and the delay between decision and explosion. The empire ran on timetables. We tore the pages out. Enemy officers, capable and brave, admitted the truth after the war, with cool shame. They had ships, plans, and courage to spare. They did not have fuel. You cannot fight a war of movement standing still. Submarines forced stillness, which rotted readiness, which turned proud hulls into statues fit only for the photographer and the surrender team. Immobilized sounds gentle. It is the harshest verdict a navy can hear. It means men did not fail. Systems did. Under pressure from a rival that fixed problems faster than you could name them. The year of no fuel looked quiet to families ashore. Ships at rest looked safe. It sounded like victory to sailors who heard engines cough into silence and knew why. Strategy is what you can keep doing. America kept building boats, fixing torpedoes, reading signals, feeding crews, and launching the next patrol faster than the enemy could replace a single tanker. When the enemy tried to hide, our radar turned weather into a weapon, and our codebreakers turned whispers into maps. That is how tides truly turn. Do what works until the other side can do nothing at all. Walk a pier in your mind and listen. Wind snaps flags that mean nothing because no sailing orders are coming. Paint glows on hulls that cannot leave. Pilots smoke beside immaculate aircraft that will not fly. Somewhere offshore, a conning tower slides under, batteries full, tubes loaded, crew awake, plot tight. A free nation reached across an ocean and closed a fist without shouting. That silence toppled strategy, as surely as any bombardment. Call it blockade by torpedo. The enemy called it the end of options. Even logistics ashore shifted under the pressure. Forward bases, Fremantle, Saipan, Midway kept repair cycles short. Tenders like USS Fulton and USS Sperry swapped pumps, aligned shafts, and restocked fish so tempo never sagged. Standard boats meant spares fit every hull. When Lockwood pushed doctrine tankers first, attack at night, surface when you can, every captain could apply it immediately. A nation's habit of solving problems at the edge made the edge sharp. On the enemy side, habits frayed. Rerouting hugged coasts and created new ambush points. Faster convoys burned more fuel to deliver less. Escort crews trained less and feared more. The most dangerous commodity on a bridge became hope that the night would be empty, that wake tracks would be duds, that the submarine would miss. Hope is not a tactic. American arithmetic swatted it away. The final image is quiet. A chart on a Pearl Harbor table shows convoy threads fading until they stop. A clerk closes a folder. In a wardroom far forward, a captain writes a short letter home and folds it neat. A quartermaster sets the next intercept box with a dull pencil. The engine room answers a bell with a deeper note. The sea is wide and blue, but the wakes are thin. This is what victory looks like when you choose targets that matter and keep choosing them. The fleet that could not sail lost without a battle, because battles were no longer necessary. Count from the moment torpedoes start telling the truth and radar doctrine hardens. In roughly 3 relentless years, US submarines strangle an empire's lifelines and rewrite naval war. The ledger is brutal and elegant. About 1,314 enemy ships sent down most of Japan's merchant tonnage, near 5.3 million tons, hundreds of warships, and the largest warship ever sunk by a submarine, Shinano, erased on her maiden voyage. Post-war accounting credited American subs with roughly 54.6% of all Japanese vessels lost. Fewer than 2% of our Navy did that, with 52 submarines sacrificed and about 3,506 men gone, the highest casualty rate of any American branch. These are not numbers to boast over. They are numbers to understand. Understanding starts with values that turn into tools. We told the truth about flawed weapons and fixed them with tests no memo could deny. We standardized boats so a spare part in Pearl fit a hull built on a river in Wisconsin, and crews could step aboard new ships and fight like veterans by the end of shakedown. We built the TDC so courage could plug into calculation and make hits on schedule. We embraced SJ radar and turned night into American time. We listened to code breakers who drew boxes on charts and showed up at those boxes like clockwork. A free country stacked small, honest decisions into a mountain the enemy could not climb. Faces anchor the summit. Oigina B. Flucky led Barb to rocket shore attacks and the Karafuto train demolition in July 1945, grinning as he told raiders to head for Siberia if things went wrong. Gallows, humor wrapped around meticulous planning. Richard H. O'Kane drove Tang into convoys at point blank, proving nerve plus method beats numbers until a cruel circular run wrote the cost of war in one flash. Sam Dealey on Harder hunted destroyers until both names became shorthand for audacity. George L. Street 3 took Tirante into harbours and turned off-limits into target-rich. Slade Cutter hammered with Seahorse like a metronome. On quieter days, boats performed mercies that echo forever. Pampanito saving 73 Allied POWs in September 1944. Sailors handing chocolate and clean water to men who thought the sea owned them, names neatly logged so families would learn living truth. Strength with a steady hand is a weapon tyrannies rarely understand. The enemy's view closes the loop. Japanese officers were professionals who sailed into danger with courage. They also served a system that could not admit failure fast enough to fix it. When oil ran low, training hours shrank. When hours shrank, skill dulled. When skill dulled, losses rose, which burned still more fuel and time. Submarines pressed the cycle until it locked. Harbours filled with ships that looked powerful in photographs and powerless in fact. Factories still had lathes. Workers still had discipline. Orders still had stamps. None of that moves an ounce of fuel across a hostile sea. The crobbling dot-in-dotty. War ended not only because cities burned, but because motion stopped. If totals sound impossible, watch them grow from deck plates up. A machinist's mate on a tender swaps a pump and sends a boat out a day early. A radioman in Pearl marks a pattern and writes a 2-line estimate that puts a submarine where a convoy will pass tomorrow night. A torpedoman files a firing pin so it won't stick on an oblique hit. A quartermaster keeps a plot that lets a captain fire a minute sooner. A skipper signs a patrol report that reads like a lab sheet. Bearing, range, spread, hits, observed secondaries. Thousands of small, honest acts pile up until an empire cannot move. That is democracy in wartime. Many hands, one will, results over ritual. The POW voices carry the soul of the ledger. A British sergeant, rescued by Pampanito, remembers canned peaches and clean water as the finest meal of his life. An Australian corporal says the first American word he heard was welcome, and it sounded like a flag. A Japanese second officer, wrapped in a US Navy blanket after his tanker died, whispered, "Your submarines were everywhere," meaning arithmetic finally felt like fate. Our sailors wrote those names and words into logs with the same neat pen that recorded torpedo counts. Mercy did not slow victory. It defined what kind of victory we wanted. Industry and intellect made the reach global. Manitowoc slid Balau hulls down a river past barns and silos. Electric boat in Groton welded through the night. Portsmouth and Mare Island turned blueprints into hull numbers with a rhythm like music. Standardization meant any tender could heal any wound a boat brought home. Intelligence rooms under green lamps stitched call signs and tides into maps a captain could use. The front spoke. The rear answered. The next patrol left better than the last. That loop report, fix, teach, repeat, was America's secret engine. Courage without cruelty gave power its purpose. Submarines shelled shore, targets when needed, then stopped to rescue enemy sailors when possible. Chiefs shared coffee with men they had fought an hour before. The world noticed. Propaganda cracked where blankets covered shivering shoulders. Abundance can be a weapon when it is generous. It tells enemies they can lay down fear and live. Now the camera rises. The Pacific sprawls blue and wide, but the wakes are thin. Harbours are quiet. Ships that dreamed of sorties rust at anchor. 3 years is not long in a nation's life. It is an eternity when every patrol counts. American submariners took truth, tools, standard parts, brainpower, and bravery, and made an ocean obey. The final line writes itself with modest pride. A tiny arm of a free people did an impossible thing, and did it fast, because honesty in testing, trust in teams, and mercy in strength are not just virtues, they are advantages. The world learned that lesson. So did we. And the next time a tyrant bets on distance and darkness, he will find American math waiting in the night, patient as a periscope and exact as a stopwatch, ready to turn another ocean into a road only freedom can drive.